In 1958, 3 children vanished from a rural Texas parish during a storm. Their teacher, a nun, and the parish priest disappeared the same night. No ransom, no remains, no answers. 40 years later, when detectives reopened the file, the arrest that followed shocked everyone. Because the voice on the evidence tape didn't belong to a killer, it belonged to a man who hadn't been born when the murders happened. This is the seventh bell, the case that made even the skeptics believe silence can speak. If unsolved disappearances and buried confessions keep you up at night, hit subscribe. You'll want to hear this one to the end. The bells of St. Matthew's had always sounded softer in the rain. On the night of May 3rd, 1958, they barely reached the houses tucked along the old Texas road, muffled by thunder that rolled low enough to shake windows. Inside the parish school, dim lights still burned. Sister Margaret Doyle lingered near the classroom door, her habit damp from the walk across the courtyard. She'd dismissed the children hours ago, but 3 had stayed: Tommy Ray Burns, Ellen Cooper, and little Joseph Vega, waiting for parents who never came. Father Kellen had insisted she keep them inside until the weather cleared. By 9:30, the rain had turned to sheets. The last bus had passed, its headlights carving the darkness before vanishing toward the highway. Margaret checked her watch again, frowning. She'd already called the sheriff's office to ask about the road closures, and the operator had told her to wait it out. She could hear Father Kellen in the rectory, his voice carrying faintly through the old pipes. Something about the generator. The storm had knocked out power twice already. When the lights flickered again, she crossed herself and whispered a prayer. "St. Michael, defend us in battle," the thunder answered. Moments later, a sound came from the hallway. Soft footsteps, deliberate. She turned. "Father?" No reply. Lightning split the sky outside the stained glass window, and for a heartbeat, the hallway flashed bright as daylight. She saw movement, a shadow near the staircase, the hem of a coat, the glint of metal. Then darkness again. Her pulse climbed. She gathered the children, her voice steady though her hands shook. "We're going next door to the chapel, all right? We'll wait for Father there." Tommy clutched her sleeve. "What about the man, sister?" "What man?" "The one in the hall." Margaret swallowed, probably just Father Kellen. But when they reached the chapel, the door stood open. The candlelight guttered out. Rain hissed through the doorway. The crucifix above the altar had fallen, face down on the stone floor. And outside, the sound of the church bell, one slow toll that no one had rung by morning. The sheriff found the building empty. No footprints past the porch, no signs of struggle, just 5 umbrellas by the door and the faint smell of candle wax. Austin, 1998. Detective Daniel Heller hated the smell of old paper. The county archive was a tomb for dead cases, every file a coffin labeled with someone else's grief. He had spent 3 decades collecting them, the unsolved, the forgotten. But this one was different. He'd first read about St. Matthew's in a yellowed clipping found during an audit: 3 parish children, 2 clergy missing in storm. Below the headline, a photograph, grainy, almost tender, of Father Kellen standing beside Sister Margaret, and a row of smiling first communicants. It should have ended as a cold file among thousands, but one line had hooked him. Case reopened 1997, new witness statement pending. That witness had since died. The rain outside the archive tapped at the windows, faint and arrhythmic, like fingers on glass. Heller rubbed his temples, thinking of the old priest's face in the photo 40 years gone. No bodies, no confessions, only rumor. He'd driven out to the ruins of St. Matthew's earlier that week, the chapel now half swallowed by vines, the bell tower collapsed in on itself. The air had smelled of moss and rust, and something else. Faint incense, the kind that clings to memory. Now, sitting under the flicker of a dying fluorescent light, he spread the files across the table. The folder contained photographs, transcribed interviews, and one object wrapped in brown evidence paper. He unfolded it carefully. A rosary. The beads were cracked, one missing entirely. The tag read, "Recovered near Riverbank, 1961. Source unverified." He turned it in his palm. Cold, even after all these years. The door to the records room creaked. Heller looked up to see a young archivist, a woman in her late 20s, her hair pulled back, eyes tired but alert. "You're still here," she said softly. "We close in 10 minutes. He smiled faintly. "Some of us never leave." She hesitated at the threshold. "You're working the St. Matthew's case, aren't you?" His hand froze over the file. "That obvious? It's the only box no one touches." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "My grandmother lived near there. She said they heard the church bell the night it happened. One toll every hour till sunrise. Sheriff said it was wind, but she swore she saw lights by the river." "What kind of lights?" "Lanterns, moving in a line." Heller scribbled the detail in his notebook, though he knew he'd dream about it later anyway. "Thanks," he said. "You should go home before the rain starts again." When she left, the silence returned like a presence. He looked back at the rosary, the missing bead, the storm, the children. He thought of the one line that had survived in the sheriff's log. Voices heard under floorboards. Search discontinued due to flood risk. He felt something stir, not faith, not fear, but the cold awareness that every mystery waits for the right ear. He slipped the rosary into a small evidence bag and wrote on the label, "Reopened, Heller, D., 1998. Outside, thunder rolled. The lights flickered once, then steadied, and from somewhere distant, too far to be the city bells, came a single toll of metal through rain. Heller froze, listening. It came again. He reached for his coat. Some calls you don't ignore. The rain had passed by morning, leaving Austin veiled in fog. Detective Daniel Heller parked his aging Ford by the embankment where the old parish once stood. It was late autumn, the air cool enough to burn the lungs on the first inhale. The river looked harmless, a ribbon of gray slipping through reeds and old stones. But Heller had read the reports in the spring of 1961, when drought lowered the waterline. A set of small bones surfaced here. "Animal," the coroner said. But the sheriff who filed the report left the line blank where "species" should have gone. He stepped carefully down the embankment, boots sinking into the soft earth. A few crows circled overhead, their cries thin and sharp. Someone had left flowers near the ruined chapel foundation, faded carnations, tied with white ribbon. The stems were freshly cut. Heller crouched beside them. A note was tucked beneath the ribbon, the ink smeared by dew. They were never meant to be found. He exhaled slowly. There was always someone who still believed in ghosts. Behind him, a voice said, "They warned you off this case yet?" He turned. A woman stood at the edge of the clearing, wrapped in a navy raincoat, gray hair pulled into a neat braid. Her posture was confident, like someone used to being listened to. "Detective Heller?" she asked. He nodded. "And you are?" "Eleanor Kellen. My father was Thomas Kellen." For a moment he didn't speak. "The priest?" "The priest," she said, her mouth tightening, or what was left of him after the papers finished with his name. They walked to the chapel ruins together. The air smelled faintly of wet limestone and something older. Candle wax. Maybe? Heller noticed how her gaze lingered on the bell tower's remains, her expression a mix of defiance and grief. "You came back here often?" he asked. "Only when I can stand it." "What about your father? You think he ran? Or was taken?" She gave a bitter laugh. "People like him don't run, they're carried." He waited. She sighed. "My father wasn't supposed to be at St. Matthew's that night. He was meant to be in Dallas for a conference. He told me he changed his plans because of a letter. A letter? He didn't show it to anyone, only said that it came from Sister Margaret. She wanted to meet after Vespers, something about the children. Heller scribbled in his notebook. And you're sure he said children? Yes, he sounded... She hesitated, searching for the word. Afraid, but not for himself, for her. Was there ever talk between them? Eleanor's jaw tightened. You mean scandal? He said nothing. She was older, Eleanor said finally. My father admired her faith. People made that uglier than it was. Did you ever meet her? Once. I was 14. She had kind eyes, but when she looked at me, I remember thinking she knew something she wished she didn't. The wind picked up, rattling the dead reeds. Mrs. Kellen, Heller said quietly. Why come forward now? Because they're breaking ground here next week. The diocese plans to build a retreat center. Once they pour the foundation, this place will vanish again. You think there's something still buried? She nodded toward the river. The church always buries its mistakes. Some just float back up. Heller followed her gaze. The water had darkened with the shifting light, moving sluggishly past the old retaining wall. He felt that old pulse of intuition, the one that said something's here, even when evidence said otherwise. Did your father ever write anything about that night? Only 1 page in his journal. My mother burned the rest after the investigation. You still have it? She hesitated, then reached into her coat pocket and handed him a folded piece of paper. The handwriting was small, disciplined. The storm hides the truth, but not from the children. They saw who opened the door. Heller looked up. You think this was his last entry? It's dated the day before he vanished. Who opened the door? I was hoping you'd tell me. They stood in silence across the field. Fog rolled off the water in pale ribbons. Mrs. Kellen, he said at last, I'd like to borrow this for analysis. She nodded, then turned to leave. Detective. Yes? If you hear the bells, she said. Don't go toward them. He watched her disappear through the mist. The rest of the day, Heller spent cross-referencing parish rosters and newspaper archives. The more he read, the stranger it became. St. Matthew's had reported 5 missing, 3 children, 1 nun, 1 priest. But the diocese file listed 6. The extra line was redacted. By dusk, he sat in his car overlooking the river again. The fog had thickened, swallowing the far bank. He unfolded the priest's note once more, tracing the ink with his thumb. The storm hides the truth, but not from the children. They saw who opened the door. He closed his eyes, replaying the details. The letters, the lanterns, the rosary. The case had waited 40 years for someone to ask the right question. Lightning flickered far off, silent this time. When he opened his eyes again, he saw it. A small figure on the opposite bank, too far to distinguish, standing knee-deep in the water. A child, maybe. Or his mind filling gaps the fog left blank. Then came the sound, the faint toll of a bell. 1 note, low and deliberate. Heller stepped out of the car, rain prickling his face. By the time he reached the river's edge, the figure was gone. Only ripples spread across the current, circling something pale that floated briefly before sinking. A fragment of cloth, white and small enough to fit in a child's hand. He crouched and touched the water. It was warm. Behind him, the church bell tolled again. The city woke under the gray hush of rain again. Daniel Heller sat in his office, staring at the wall clock as though it might confess something. He hadn't slept. The rhythm of the storm outside felt too deliberate, a soft percussion that seemed to whisper with every drop. They saw who opened the door. He took another swallow of cold coffee and opened the case file he'd borrowed from archives. The folder was older than he was. Its corners curled, the paper inside brittle and yellowed, the list of missing. Thomas Kellen, 42, parish priest. Sister Margaret Doyle, 37. Thomas Ray Burns, 9. Ellen Cooper, 8. Joseph Vega, 7. 5 names, 5 faces, 5 grainy photos clipped from school registries and parish newsletters. He laid them across the desk like playing cards. But the diocese file had listed 6. He flipped through every page again. Interview transcripts, typed memos, press clippings. Then, near the back, an index sheet. Witness interviews. Numbers 1 to 14. Only 13 were attached. He checked again. Numbers jumped from 10 to 12. Number 11 was missing. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. Number 11, he muttered. Who the hell were you? A knock at the door broke the thought. Come in. The archivist from before stepped inside, her umbrella dripping on the mat. Detective Heller, she said, slightly out of breath. You told me to call if I found anything unusual in the storage logs. You did. She nodded. There's a box marked St. Matthew's Parish listed in our 1978 inventory. Microfilm transfer, but the reel isn't there. Just an empty case. What was on it? Index says, Interview, M. Doyle, August 1958. Heller froze. Sister Margaret? That's what it says, but she went missing in May. He leaned back in his chair, pulse quickening. You're sure about that date? I checked twice. Heller stood, grabbing his coat. Show me. The archive basement was colder than he remembered. Rows of metal shelves stretched into shadows, boxes stacked like coffins, each labeled in thin black script. The archivist led him to a locked cabinet. Here, she said. Microfilm section, bottom drawer. Heller crouched and pulled it open. The cardboard sleeve lay inside, empty except for a strip of torn tape written across it in faded ink. M. Doyle, August 12th, 1958. Audio only. He turned it over. Someone had scrawled another note on the back. Do not catalog. Who wrote that? No idea, the archivist said. We only found this yesterday when reorganizing transfers. Was anyone else down here recently? Just the maintenance crew, but I checked the sign-in log. A name was added and crossed out last week. She handed him the clipboard. The ink bled slightly, but he could make out the letters. E. Kellen. He looked up sharply. Eleanor Kellen was here? Apparently, though she never checked anything out. Heller stared at the empty sleeve and interview dated after the nun vanished. A missing reel. A visitor using the name of the missing priest's daughter. He thanked the archivist and climbed the stairs. Mind already turning, the rain had thickened again, hammering the windows like fists. Back in his office, he laid out the facts. The reel. August 12th, 1958. Interviewee. Sister Margaret Doyle. Presumed missing since May 3rd result. Tape missing. Case unlogged. Recent activity. Eleanor Kellen, unaccounted for. He needed to know what was on that tape. He called the diocesan office, his voice level but clippy. After a few transfers, he reached a weary-sounding secretary. St. Matthew's, yes. Those records are sealed, detective, she said. Internal matter. Internal or not, someone erased an interview with a missing nun. A pause. You should speak to Father Alcott. He oversees the archives now. Then connect me. Another pause. Longer this time. I'm afraid Father Alcott passed away 2 weeks ago. The line went dead. Night fell early. The storm had pushed the clouds low and heavy, pressing the city into shadow. Heller drove aimlessly, the wipers squealing across the windshield. He ended up at the old parish again, headlights slicing through the fog. He parked, engine idling. The ruins loomed ahead, skeletal outlines against the mist. He walked to the river, boots squelching in mud. Somewhere out there was the truth, locked behind water and years of silence. He thought of the missing reel, of Sister Margaret's recorded voice trapped in magnetic tape that no one wanted found. A flash of light broke across the water, not lightning, steadier, rhythmic. He crouched. The light was coming from under the collapsed foundation, flickering faintly like the glow of a lantern behind stone. Heller waded closer. The ground gave underfoot, soft with rot. He reached the cracked wall and ran his hand along it, finding a narrow gap just wide enough for an arm. The light flickered again. A reflection, maybe, or something electrical buried in the ruin. Then he heard it, faint, muffled but unmistakable, a voice. He pressed his ear to the stone. It was a woman's voice, distorted, like an old tape played underwater. "Forgive me, Father, for I have seen what cannot be forgiven." The rest dissolved in static. He stumbled back, heart pounding. The light blinked once more, then vanished. When he caught his breath, he pulled out his phone, ready to call it in, but the screen stayed black, refusing to turn on. He stared at his reflection in the dark glass. For a second, it wasn't his face he saw, but someone else's. A woman in a habit, eyes hollow with exhaustion. Then she was gone. He pocketed the phone and turned toward the car, the weight of the missing tape heavy in his thoughts. If Sister Margaret's voice had really been recorded after May 3rd, then either the timeline was wrong, or she hadn't vanished when they thought she did, and if she hadn't vanished... The bell tolled once, sharp and close, cutting off the thought. Heller froze. The tower ruin was only a dark silhouette now, but the sound had come from inside it. He waited, every nerve alive. No second toll followed. Only the whisper of rain. He exhaled shakily and looked toward the foundation again. This time the light didn't return. Only the river moved, carrying its secrets past him like confessions lost to the current. The next morning came pale and brittle, the kind of cold that makes light feel thin. Daniel Heller hadn't slept again. The voice he'd heard by the river looped in his mind like an old cassette, the distorted whisper, the plea, "Forgive me, Father, for I have seen what cannot be forgiven." He replayed it over and over in silence. Memory is unreliable. He knew that. But there are sounds your brain refuses to invent, the kind that carry weight. He needed proof. At sunrise, he drove back to the county archive. The parking lot was empty, except for a single red sedan, the archivist's. She was already inside, lights flickering on one by one through the windows. When he entered, she looked startled. "Detective, you scared me." "Sorry," he said, removing his hat. "I need your help." "With what?" "The missing reel. I think someone recorded Sister Margaret after she disappeared." She hesitated, lips pressed tight. "That's not possible." "Everything about this case isn't possible," Heller replied. "I need to know who accessed the transfer logs before you found them." She led him to her desk and pulled up the database. The screen glowed a dim green, the interface old and clunky. "Maintenance," she murmured. "A man named Leary signed for the drawer 3 days before you came, but he's been on leave since." "Address?" She printed it out. "He lives near the river. South Bank Apartments." Heller took the paper. "If he still has that reel, I need it." The archivist looked uneasy. "Detective, if that tape really exists, it shouldn't." "What do you mean?" She closed the drawer quietly. "I was raised Catholic. There are things the church doesn't burn. They bury them. A recording like that would have been locked away for a reason. Then someone wanted it unburied." He turned to leave, but she caught his sleeve. "Be careful, Heller. My grandmother used to say the bells ring for the ones who dig too deep." South Bank Apartments sat on the edge of the old river road, a decaying row of concrete boxes left behind by progress. The sign out front still read, "Modern Living." Apartment 2B smelled of mildew and dust. Heller knocked twice. No answer. He tried the handle. Unlocked. Inside, the curtains were drawn, and the air was heavy with disuse. A table stood in the center of the room, covered with microfilm reels, old photographs, and a small reel-to-reel tape recorder, the machine, was still plugged in. "Mr. Leary?" Heller called. Silence. He moved farther in. There was coffee in a cup on the counter, cold but not stale. Someone had been here last night. Then he saw it, on the floor near the couch. A single rosary bead, dark with age. He crouched and picked it up behind him. The tape recorder clicked softly. He turned. The reels began to spin. A voice emerged, warped, faint, but unmistakably female. "Forgive me, Father." Heller froze. The same words he'd heard at the river. He reached for the stop button, but the machine kept playing, the tape feeding itself like something alive. "For I have sinned in silence. They said confession cleanses, but this..." Static, not meant for light. He said they would see the door open and never come back. Heller's pulse climbed. "Sister Margaret," he whispered. "The children saw. He promised safety, but the light..." Static. "The river took them before dawn." The machine stopped with a metallic click. Heller stood in silence, the sound of his own heartbeat filling the room. Then came a knock at the door. He turned sharply. "Detective Heller." It was the archivist, standing in the doorway, raincoat soaked through. "You shouldn't be here. How did you find me?" "I followed. I had to make sure you were safe." He frowned. "You said you didn't believe this tape existed." "I said it shouldn't." She stepped closer, eyes flicking to the recorder. "You played it?" "Yes." She looked pale. "Then it's already started." "What is?" She hesitated, then said softly, "My grandmother was Sister Margaret's cousin. I changed my name after she disappeared. The diocese told us never to ask questions. I thought it was superstition until last night." Heller felt the floor shift under him. "You're..." "Yes. Margaret Doyle was my family." He took a slow breath. "Then you know what's on this tape." She nodded. It wasn't a confession. It was a warning. She recorded it for the bishop the night before the storm. "My grandmother said she found Margaret's rosary by the water the next morning. She tried to turn it in, but a priest came to collect it. They buried it under the altar." "Why?" "To hide what she said." The room felt smaller. Rain pressed against the windows in a steady whisper. "What happened to Leary?" Heller asked. The archivist shook her head. "Gone. Same night you went to the river. His apartment was empty this morning." "Gone where?" She didn't answer. Her gaze was fixed on the tape recorder. "You shouldn't have played it." He stepped closer. "Why not?" "Because once you hear her voice," she said, "you start to dream in the storm." A low rumble rolled outside. Heller's phone buzzed on the table. A new voicemail. Unknown number. He pressed play. The message was full of static, then a faint whisper. The same woman's voice. He opened the door again. The line went dead. The archivist's hand trembled. "That's her. Margaret's been dead for 40 years. "Maybe," she said, "but not silent." They stood listening to the storm. The tape reels spun again, slowly, though neither of them had touched the machine. "For I have seen what cannot be forgiven." Then nothing but static, long and low, like wind moving through a hollow space. Heller drove home through the rain, the echo of her voice chasing him the whole way. His reflection in the windshield seemed unfamiliar, older, heavier. He parked outside his apartment, switched off the engine, and sat in silence. From the glove compartment, he took the evidence bag containing the old rosary. He held it against his palm, feeling the missing bead. He whispered, "Who opened the door, sister?" A sudden peal of thunder shook the air, followed by a single toll of a distant bell. He looked up sharply. There were no churches nearby. Morning broke like an old photograph. Washed out, brittle, edges blurred. Detective Daniel Heller stared at the empty coffee cup beside his tape recorder and tried to remember when he'd last slept through a night. The voice from the reel haunted him. Not just the words, but the rhythm, The breath between them. The way faith itself sounded afraid. He replayed it once more static. A soft intake of breath. They said confession cleanses, but this, not meant for light. He stopped the tape. His reflection in the window looked hollowed out. If the archivist was telling the truth, if Leary had handled that reel, then maybe the man hadn't vanished at all. Maybe he'd gone where Sister Margaret had gone before him, the river. By noon, Heller's car was heading south again, tires hissing against damp asphalt. The rain had eased, leaving the air metallic and heavy. He followed the road until it thinned to a dirt lane lined with oaks that bent toward the water. Half a mile down, a rusted sign read, "Riverside Storage Units." A padlock hung broken from the gate. Inside, most of the units stood empty, their doors yawning like mouths. Only one was shut, number 14. A single bulb flickered above it. Heller knocked. "Leary, it's Detective Heller." No answer. He pushed the door open. The smell hit first, iron, mildew, and something sweet rotting underneath. In the center of the unit stood a wooden table with stacks of old diocese records, a portable projector, and a dozen reels of tape. On the wall, photographs had been pinned with surgical precision black and white shots of St. Bridget's Church, the convent across the river, and a school playground long since overgrown. Children in uniforms, frozen mid-laughter. Each photo had a red circle drawn around one face, a girl of about 8, hair dark, eyes half closed. Beneath the last photo, Leary had written a single word in pencil. Him. Heller's stomach turned. He set down his notepad and leaned closer. The girl's face looked eerily familiar. He searched his memory, flipping through years of case files and missing person reports. Then it came to him. Ellen Rowe. Vanished July 1958. One of the 6 children the town had lost that summer. The very year the priest and the nun disappeared, Heller felt his pulse rise. "Jesus!" A rustle behind him. He spun around, hand instinctively going for his sidearm. Leary stood in the corner, eyes sunken, hands trembling. "You shouldn't have touched that," he rasped. "Mr. Leary, I'm Detective Heller." "I know who you are. They said you'd come." "Who did?" Leary didn't answer. His gaze flicked to the table. "The tape. It doesn't stop, does it? You play it, and it plays you." "Where did you get it?" He smiled, thin and joyless. "From the archive. Thought it was history. Turns out it's a doorway." "Doorway to what?" Leary's eyes glimmered with something between fear and devotion. To the sound she heard before she died. Heller stepped closer. "You knew Sister Margaret?" "I met her once," he said softly. "Before the storm. She was trying to save them, the children. But the Father said the river forgives what the Church can't." The phrase sent a chill through Heller. "The Father? You mean the priest who vanished?" Leary nodded. "Father Brennan. They said he drowned, but the water never gave him back. It only keeps what it forgives." He reached for a reel on the table. "Listen." Heller hesitated. "I've heard enough voices for one lifetime. This one's not hers." The machine clicked on. A man's voice, low and solemn. "The water takes, the water cleanses, faith is the current that carries us home." Then a splash, followed by a child's laugh, brief, bright, then cut off by static. Leary shut it off, hands shaking. "You see? They recorded everything. The Church knew. Who else has heard this?" Leary looked around as if afraid the walls could answer. "They come for whoever listens. The bells start, and then—" He stopped, listening. Faint, distant, a single bell tolled from across the river. Heller froze. "There's no chapel here." Leary's face went white. Then it started again. He lunged for the light switch, plunging the room into shadow. "Don't look at the water," he whispered. "Leary!" But the man was already backing away toward the far wall. "They're in the reflection. That's how they find you." A sharp metallic snap. The bulb burst, showering glass. In the flash that followed, Heller saw Leary's silhouette against the back door, and then nothing. When the light steadied again, the man was gone. Heller searched the unit, found only footprints leading toward the embankment behind the fence. They ended at the river's edge. The water was calm, too calm. Floating near the reeds was a photograph, face up. It was of the same little girl, Ellen Rowe, but this time she wasn't smiling. Her eyes were closed, her lips parted, as if mid-prayer. Heller pocketed the photo and turned back. On the wall above the table, words had been written in chalk, faint but legible under his flashlight. The 6th bell never rang. He didn't understand what it meant, not yet. But as he left the unit, the sound followed him. The low toll of a bell, deep, deliberate, echoing through the mist. That night he sat in his car outside the motel, rain hammering the windshield, the tape recorder in the passenger seat. He played the man's voice again. Faith is the current that carries us home. The phrase looped, distorted by static. Then another sound slipped through, not on the original tape, a child humming a lullaby. He shut it off, heart pounding. On instinct, he looked toward the rearview mirror. For a moment, just a trick of reflection, he told himself. A figure stood behind him in the glass, small, barefoot. Then it was gone. He reached for his recorder and whispered, "Field note. Day 4. Evidence suggests connection between 1958 disappearances and church activity. Leary unstable. Believes the tapes summon auditory phenomena linked to the river possible psychosis, or something worse." He stopped, thumb hovering over the button. Outside, the rain eased, and somewhere in the distance, a child's voice sang the final line of an old hymn, light through the water, water through light. Then silence. Heller whispered to the empty car, "What did you do, Father Brennan?" Detective Daniel Heller arrived at the county archives just after dawn, carrying the photograph he'd pulled from the river. The clerk on duty, a tired woman with a pencil behind her ear, barely looked up when he showed his badge, "Need access to juvenile files," he said. "Summer of 1958. Disappearances." She sighed and rolled her chair to the back. "You're the second one this month asking about that year." "Who was the first?" "Some church historian name sounded Irish. Left a donation and a mess." Heller's pulse ticked. Leary. When the woman returned with the boxes, dust fell like slow rain. "They're all yours, Detective. You'll need gloves. They smell like sin and mildew." He smiled thinly. "That's half the county." Hours passed in the flicker of a desk lamp. Files yellowed with time told the same story over and over. A child vanished between June and September. Each family lived within walking distance of St. Bridget's Parish School. Each child attended Mass that final Sunday. And every report included one chilling note. No signs of abduction. Doors locked from inside. 6 children, Ellen Rowe among them. By noon, the window light had turned the color of pewter. Heller flipped another file and froze. The name at the top read, Jacob Kellen, age 9. Father, Reverend Thomas Kellen. The priest himself. Heller sat back. He lost his own son. The official record said the boy drowned in the river during the first week of August. Body never recovered. 1 week later, Father Brennan and Sister Margaret disappeared. He read the mother's statement, handwritten in trembling ink. "Thomas said Jacob heard voices in the river after Vespers. I thought it was play, but he called them the choir. The last night he asked his father to show him where the singing came from." Heller felt the skin crawl along his arms. He flipped the page. Attached was a photograph of the parish choir, children in robes, Father Brennan standing behind them. In the back row, Ellen Rowe. He copied the names and addresses of the surviving families, though most were decades gone. But one, the last on the list, made him stop. Ruth Callahan, age 8 in 1958. No record of her death. The note in red pencil, relocated out of state, 1959. A living witness. He dialed the number listed for a nursing home in Dallas. "This is Detective Heller. I'm looking for a resident named Ruth Callahan. She'd be in her 70s. The nurse checked. "She's here, yes, hard of hearing. Talks about nuns a lot. You family?" "Something like that," he said. He was on the road within the hour. The home stood on the city's quiet edge, where the sky seemed too wide for its own good inside. The halls smelled of disinfectant and overboiled vegetables. He found Ruth in a sunroom, staring at a bird feeder beyond the glass. She looked small against the wheelchair, her hair thin as smoke. "Miss Callahan?" Her eyes shifted toward him. Pale blue, sharp despite the years. "You're not a priest," she said. "No, ma'am, Detective Heller. I'm looking into something that happened when you were a child. St. Bridget's." Her lips twitched. The songs again. "You remember them?" "I never forgot." He pulled up a chair. "Do you remember Father Brennan?" "He told us God had music for every soul," she said softly, "said some notes were too pure for earth." "What happened the night the others vanished?" Her gaze drifted past him, to the reflection of the window. "It rained. The river was full. He told us to listen. Said the water carried prayers faster than angels. We went down to the banks. 6 of us, the nun carried a lantern." "Sister Margaret." Ruth's hands trembled. "He said he'd show us how to be close to God. We sang. The hymn, I can still hear it." She began humming, slow and off-key. The same melody Heller had heard on the tape. "What happened next, Ruth?" "Light," she whispered, "and the sound of bells underwater. Then I woke up in the rectory alone. They said I'd imagined it, but I still dream of the river's mouth opening." "The church told you not to speak about it?" "They said Father Brennan died saving us." "Do you believe that?" Her eyes filled with tears. "No one saves you from what you believe in, Detective. You save yourself by forgetting." He reached out and touched her hand. "Thank you." As he stood to leave, she caught his sleeve. "If you find them, don't listen to the 6th bell." He paused. "Why?" "Because that's the one that answers back." Night fell on the drive home. The highway was a ribbon of wet asphalt and reflected lights. Ruth's words gnawed at him. Bells answering back. He stopped at a gas station, used the payphone to call the archivist who'd mentioned Leary. No answer. Just static. And under it, faintly, what sounded like choral music. He hung up hard. When he reached his motel, an envelope waited at the door. No stamp, no name. Inside was a single photograph. The parish choir again, same as before, except this time the priest's face had been scratched out, written in the corner, neat and deliberate. "You're next to here." He looked up and scanned the parking lot. Empty except for the hum of a soda machine. Inside, he locked the door, placed the photo on the table beside his recorder, and spoke quietly. Field note, Day 5. Ruth Callahan confirms direct contact with Father Brennan night of disappearance. Witness connects auditory hallucinations to river. Describes ritual under storm conditions. Cross-reference, Jacob Brennan, son of priest, listed as first casualty. He stopped, listening somewhere outside. A bell tolled. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. 6 slow notes. He whispered to himself, "And what happens when the 7th rings?" The rain began again, steady as breath. The morning after Ruth Callahan's interview, Detective Daniel Heller awoke to the sound of water running. For a moment he thought it was rain again, but when he opened his eyes, he saw condensation streaking the motel wall, dripping down in slow lines. He sat up fast. The tap in the bathroom was dry. He rubbed his face and told himself it was nothing, a plumbing leak, a dream leftover, but the smell of river water clung to the air. He packed the photograph and the tape recorder, left the motel before sunrise, and drove straight to the diocese headquarters. If the church had buried Father Brennan's recordings, this was where they'd done it. The receptionist, a young woman in gray, looked startled when he flashed his badge. "I need to see your archive director," he said. "Father Connolly?" "Whoever's in charge." She hesitated. "He's not available." "Then make him." Moments later, a door opened down the hall and an older priest appeared. Tall, silver-haired, the kind of face that looked carved for confessionals. "I'm Father Connolly," he said. "You're the detective troubling my staff." Heller held up the photo. "Recognize these children?" Connolly glanced at it and sighed. "St. Bridget's Choir, 1958, a tragedy we all mourn." "Then maybe you can explain why your archives contain sealed tapes of the priest who led them. Tapes marked "Do Not Catalog." The priest's eyes sharpened. "Where did you hear that?" "From an archivist named Doyle. She found one. Now she's missing." Connolly's expression didn't change. "Then perhaps she found what wasn't meant for her." Heller stepped closer. "That's not an answer." The priest folded his hands. "Father Brennan believed he could purify sin through sound. He recorded his confessions, his sermons, his experiments. Rome ordered them destroyed. But one reel survived. It is not something you should carry, detective." "I already have." For the first time, Connolly's composure cracked. "Then may God forgive you." "Forgive me for what?" "For listening." He turned away, ending the conversation. The secretary avoided Heller's eyes as she held open the door. Outside, the sun burned white against the stone walls. Heller leaned on the car and wrote his notes with shaking hands. Every answer he got only opened another door. He played the tape again while driving. Static. Then the familiar voice. "The choir is ready. The water is clear. Tonight, we sing for light." The sound warped, deepened. A second voice underneath, barely audible, repeating each phrase half a second late, as though the recording had an echo. He stopped the car and listened closer. The echo wasn't random. It was children. "Tonight we sing for light." His skin went cold. He fast-forwarded, but the voices followed, layered, rising. It sounded like a congregation breathing underwater. He hit stop. Silence. The world around him felt too quiet, the hum of insects too far away. That afternoon, Heller returned to the ruins of St. Bridget's. The sun had broken through, but the river still ran high. He crossed the muddy field to the chapel's skeletal foundation. On the altar stone, he placed a small digital recorder, field note day 6, he began. "Located site of parish ritual referenced on Brennan tapes. Objective, sound analysis for resonance anomaly." His own voice sounded thin in the open air. He set the reel-to-reel machine beside the recorder, pressed play, and let the tape roll. The wind shifted. As the voices began, Brennan and the choir, the sound bounced off the ruined walls, circling him, light through the water. The air seemed to vibrate, the river catching the echo like a tuning fork. Birds scattered from the trees. Heller stepped back, testing playback distortion. He said aloud, though his voice trembled. The tape clicked. A new voice entered, one he hadn't heard before. "Detective Heller." He froze. "You came to listen." The machine kept spinning. "Now you hear what we heard." Static swallowed the rest. He shut it off, breath coming fast. The only sound now was the river. He crouched, picked up the recorder, and saw that the digital timestamp had stopped at exactly 11:11. The same time stamped on Brennan's original reel label. Coincidence, he told himself. Electrical interference. But when he checked the playback on his device, his own voice was gone. The only thing recorded was breathing. Slow, rhythmic, not his own. He pocketed the recorder and looked toward the water. Across the river stood a small figure, a child, maybe 10 years old, barefoot on the bank. The same one he'd glimpsed days earlier. "Hey," he called. The child tilted its head, then turned and walked into the reeds. Heller ran along the bank, but by the time he reached the other side, there was no trace, only footprints that ended at the edge, as if the river had taken them mid-step. He stared at the current until dizziness forced him to look away. Back at the motel that night, he transferred both recordings to his laptop. The waveform showed spikes, 6 distinct peaks, like bell tolls. Between them, faint harmonics formed patterns almost musical. He slowed the playback. Filtering frequencies beneath the static emerged something like speech, fragmented, syllables warped by time. He opened the door. Then the 6th peak hit, and the laptop screen flickered. The waveform stretched, doubled, and in the distortion appeared an image. Not a spectrogram this time, but shapes that resembled faces. 6 of them. He slammed the laptop shut. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. When he looked at the window, his reflection seemed to move a half-second late, mouth still forming the words he hadn't spoken aloud. "They sing for light." He turned off the lamp and sat in the dark, the sound of the river still pulsing faintly in his ears. A knock came at the door. He tensed. "Who is it?" Silence. He crossed the room and opened it an inch, no one there. Only a cassette tape lying on the welcome mat. A label on it, handwritten in black ink. "The 7th Bell." He picked it up, felt the weight of it. The rain had started again, soft and constant, like applause for something unseen. He whispered, "Field note, day 6, end of entry." But when he played the tape back later, the last line wasn't his voice. "Field note, day 6, end of him." The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days. The motel walls wept in thin dark lines, and every hour the pipes hummed with a low metallic tone. Almost like a bell-submerged Detective Daniel Heller sat at the small table, staring at the cassette that someone, or something, had left outside his door. The label read in neat, patient handwriting, "The 7th Bell." He turned it over in his hands, feeling the roughness of the tape's plastic case. The handwriting matched the notes on Father Brennan's old reels. He thought of what the archivist had said. Don't listen to the bells, but the tape was evidence. Evidence had to be heard. He inserted it into the recorder, pressed play, and waited. At first, silence. Then a faint hum, so low it was almost under hearing. Slowly, the hum shaped itself into tone, C minor, steady and pulsing like a heartbeat. Then came the voice. "If you are hearing this," said Father Brennan, "then you have opened the door." Heller's chest tightened. "The 7th bell calls not for the faithful, but for the listener. We sang for light, and the light answered." There was movement in the background of the recording, shuffling feet, children whispering. Each note was a name, each echo a prayer. The river carried them, but not all prayers reach heaven. Then, quietly, "The 6th bell failed, the 7th completes." The tape clicked off. Heller rewound it, played it again, slower. When the tone stretched low enough, he could hear something behind Brennan's words. A faint, overlapping voice repeating each sentence half a beat late. It wasn't the priest's echo this time. It sounded like himself. He stopped the tape, heart pounding. For a long time he sat still, listening to the rain drum against the glass. When he finally stood, the clock on the wall had stopped at 11:11 again. The next morning, he drove to the forensic audio lab at the county police building. The technician, a thin man named Ortega, had known Heller for years and knew when not to ask questions. "Need this cleaned up," Heller said, handing him the cassette. "Voice ID, background isolation, everything." Ortega nodded. "You got it." While the machines ran, they stood watching the monitor. The waveform pulsed like a heartbeat. "Hell of a lot of subsonic noise," Ortega muttered, "almost infrasonic." "Meaning?" "Meaning whatever was recorded here is vibrating below human hearing, could be environmental resonance, could be—" He stopped. "Wait, you see that?" A spike, clear and sharp, rose between the bell tones. Ortega magnified the signal. It wasn't random. It repeated 7 times, each spike forming a clean harmonic ladder. "Not natural," Ortega said. "Almost looks coded." "Can you isolate it?" He tapped keys, filtering frequencies. A sound emerged, faint, childlike, whispering. "Detective Heller!" Both men froze. The whisper came again. "Find us." Ortega looked up. "That's your name." Heller's throat felt dry. "Pull location data off the magnetic bias, if there's any." Ortega frowned, checking the metadata. "There's a residual imprint. Latitude markers, maybe from the original recorder's calibration. It triangulates to the old St. Matthew's property." "The parish ruin." Heller stared at the numbers on the screen. 30.2489 degrees north, 97.8042 degrees west. "You're not going back there, are you?" Ortega asked quietly. "I don't have a choice." By sunset, he was standing again at the riverbank. The air hung heavy, full of ozone and something metallic. The old chapel's silhouette leaned against the horizon like a broken tooth. He carried a flashlight, a shovel, and his recorder. "Field note," he said. "Day 7. Coordinates from tape confirm link to parish site. Objective: locate origin of sound signatures." He crossed the courtyard, boots crunching on wet gravel. The bell tower ruin loomed ahead. He shone the beam inside. Stone steps slick with moss, walls glistening with condensation. Halfway up, he found the source of the tone. A small brass bell, half buried in mud, hung crooked from a rusted bracket. It was cracked clean through. He reached to touch it. The air shifted. For a moment, he thought he heard the river inside the tower, water moving where none should be. He stepped back, pointing the light downward. The floor stones were uneven, one slightly raised. He knelt, brushed away mud, and found wood underneath, planks sealing a crawl space. He pried them up with the shovel. The smell hit first. Stale air, mold, and the unmistakable sweetness of decay. Beneath the boards was a small hollow chamber lined with stone. Inside lay 6 small objects wrapped in cloth. He unfolded the first, a child's rosary. The second, tiny leather shoes. The third, a rusted lantern. Each item marked with the same inscription, "For the light." He reached for the last bundle and hesitated. Footsteps behind him. He turned fast, beam cutting across the dark. No one. Only the echo of his own movement. He looked back down. The last bundle was gone. The air grew colder. The sound of water rose again, now clearly coming from beneath the stones. He crouched lower, recorder still running. "Field note," he whispered. "Possible substructure under tower." A sudden clang. The bell above him swung once, striking its cracked mouth against stone. The tone it gave wasn't metal but voice. Long, low, almost human. Heller stumbled back, covering his ears. The bell swung again, louder. Through the noise, faint voices threaded like wind through reeds. Light through the water, water through light. The same hymn he bolted from the tower, heart hammering. Outside, the river glowed faintly, surface rippling as if lit from below. He stared at it until the light faded, then at the recorder still running in his hand. "Detective Heller," the playback whispered. He snapped it off. The river went silent. He stood alone under the fractured tower, breath clouding in the damp air, the 7th bell still echoing inside his skull. That night, he filed no report. He wrote nothing in his notebook. He sat in the car until dawn, staring at the rosary on the dashboard. One bead was missing when the first light touched the river. He finally spoke. Voice. Hoarse. Field note. Day 7. Found proof of burial chamber. Possible remains returning with ground team tomorrow. But when he replayed that note, his own voice didn't end the way he remembered. Returning with ground team tomorrow. Tomorrow. The echo stretched, folding into the faint toll of a bell. The 7th. The county survey team arrived 2 days later, armed with scanners, shovels, and the grim patience of men used to digging through secrets. Detective Daniel Heller stood beside them under the gray dawn. Raincoat collar turned up against the cold. The river was still swollen, the waterline licking at the chapel foundation. He hadn't told them everything. Not about the tapes, not about the voices. Officially, it was a recovery mission based on archival discrepancy. The words meant nothing, but they kept questions away. "Where you want the first trench?" one of the workers called. Heller pointed toward the collapsed tower. "Start there, shallow cut, there's a cavity beneath." They got to work. The metallic thud of shovels echoed through the mist. Each strike sounded too much like a bell. By noon, the team had uncovered a rectangular shaft, braced with rotted timber. When they pried away the boards, a draft of cold, damp air spilled out. The smell of stone, rust, and time. "Looks like a tunnel," said the foreman, lowering his light, heads toward the river. Heller crouched beside the opening. The walls inside were lined with carved bricks, faint Latin inscriptions still visible. Aqua est lumen. Lux est via. Water is light. Light is the way. He swallowed. "Seal this perimeter. I'm going down." The foreman frowned. "You sure, detective? We can get a crawler cam in there first." "No time." He clipped his flashlight to his jacket and descended the narrow ladder. The air grew colder, each rung slick with moss. At the bottom, his boots splashed into ankle-deep water. The tunnel stretched ahead, a low arch barely tall enough to stand. The walls shimmered faintly with mineral sheen. "Field note," he whispered, recorder in hand. "Substructure beneath tower confirmed. Likely 19th century drainage converted for ritual use. Proceeding east toward river outlet." He walked. The tunnel sloped downward, the water deepening around his calves. The sound of his steps echoed back a half-second late. Too loud, as if the tunnel itself had lungs. After 30 yards, he found a wooden door half sunk in mud. Iron bands held it shut. A small brass plate above it read simply, "Sanctum." He ran his fingers over the latch. The metal was warm to the touch. "Field note," he murmured. "Found sealed chamber. Door marked sanctum. Preparing to—" A sharp click interrupted him. The latch gave way on its own. The door swung inward. His flashlight beam caught water dripping from a vaulted ceiling. The room beyond was circular, lined with alcoves. In each alcove stood a small stone font filled with water, candles long extinguished. In the center lay an altar, wood darkened with age, carved with the same phrase, "Aqua est lumen." On the altar sat a tape recorder identical to his own, and beside it, a rosary missing one bead. He approached slowly. "Field note," he whispered, though his voice trembled. "Evidence of replication. Device matches model used by Father Brennan. Possible recording left intentionally." He pressed play. A man's voice filled the chamber. "The door beneath the river opens only for those who've listened." Heller froze. It wasn't Brennan's voice. It was his own. Each listener becomes the next keeper, each confession, the next bell. The recorder clicked off. He stepped back, bile rising in his throat. "No," he said aloud. "No, that's not possible." The water in the fonts began to tremble, rippling outward as if stirred by breath. The air vibrated, low, rhythmic, the tone of a bell. Then, from the darkness behind him, a whisper. "Detective Heller." He spun. The tunnel was empty, but the water at his feet had begun to glow faintly, pale blue light spreading like veins beneath the surface. He raised the flashlight. Faces shimmered in the water. 6 of them. Children's faces. Eyes closed. Lips moving in silent song. The glow brightened. The hymn filled the room again. Light through the water, water through light. He backed toward the door, heart hammering. "Field note," he gasped. "Possible hallucinatory event due to hypoxia or—" The sentence broke off. The recorder in his hand beeped twice, stopped recording, then played back his words in real time. "Field note, possible hallucinatory event." The echo of his own voice folded over itself, louder, layered, until it wasn't echo anymore. It was answer, possible hallucinatory event. Confirmed. He dropped the device. It hit the water with a hiss. The light went out. Darkness swallowed him for a long moment, nothing but his own breathing. Then a faint current tugged at his legs, pulling toward the altar. The water was rising. He scrambled to the ladder, climbed fast. When he broke through the hatch, the foreman was shouting, "Get out of there! The river's flooding in!" They hauled him clear as a surge of black water burst from the opening, carrying mud and fragments of stone. Something else surfaced briefly, the edge of a wooden door, before the current dragged it back down. Within minutes, the shaft filled completely. The entrance was gone. Heller sat on the wet ground, shaking, staring at the spot where the ladder had been. "Seal it," he told the foreman hoarsely. "Pour concrete." "What the hell was down there, detective?" He wiped his face. "Just a room. Empty." But he knew that wasn't true. He could still feel the water clinging to his hands, warm and faintly pulsing, like a heartbeat that wasn't his. That night, in the motel, he found his recorder lying on the table where he'd left it before the dig, dry, intact. The playback light blinked. He pressed play. Field note, day 8. The door beneath the river opens only for those who've listened. Then silence. The storm finally broke at dawn. The air hung washed and brittle, the light too clean to trust. Detective Daniel Heller sat at his motel desk, the voice from the recovered tape still ringing in his skull. "The door beneath the river opens only for those who've listened." He hadn't told anyone what he'd found below the tower. The official report said the tunnel collapsed, no further entry possible. But at night, he still heard the water moving behind the walls, as if the river had learned to breathe. He opened the small package that had arrived that morning. No return address, just his name in block letters. Inside lay a leather-bound book, cracked and water-stained, its pages swollen and fragile. A note on the first page read, "Property of Reverend Thomas Kellen, St. Matthew's Parish, the priest's journal." Heller slipped on gloves, careful not to tear the paper. The first entries were dated months before the disappearances. Sermons, confessions, routine duties. Then, in April 1958, the handwriting shifted. Tighter, more desperate April 10th. "The children speak of music no one taught them. Sister Margaret says they hum in their sleep. A hymn I do not recognize." April 28th. "The diocese will not hear of it. They call it imagination. But I have recorded their voices. The harmony is not earthly. It is mathematical. 6 tones, 6 souls." Heller's pulse quickened. He turned the page. May 2nd. "Tonight we attempt communion by sound. The 7th bell will call them to light. Sister Margaret doubts me. She fears what cannot be named May 3rd. Storm coming. God forgive me if I am wrong." The next page was torn clean out. The following entry came weeks later, the ink smeared, the hand unsteady June 12th. The water did not return them. It returned only the echo. "I hear them in my sleep. Margaret sings to calm them, but she is not there when I wake." A blot of ink stained the corner, shaped like a thumbprint. July 1st, Rome has sent for the recordings. I cannot let them take them. Confession is mine to keep. The last entry was dated August 12th, the same date on the lost interview reel. August 12th. The seventh bell has answered. It knows my name. I will give it silence, or it will take sound from the world. Forgive me, Jacob. Jacob, his son. Heller closed the book and sat back. The room seemed smaller, the walls too close. He needed to verify the handwriting. He called Ortega, the audio technician. Still have those samples from the tapes? Heller asked. Sure, do you find something? Maybe. I'm sending photos of the journal. Compare signatures. An hour later, Ortega called back, voice low. It's him. Same pressure, same loops. No doubt. Then the tapes were made after he disappeared. Looks that way. But there's more. I filtered the last reel again, the seventh bell. There's a second voice buried under Brennan's. A match to your own waveform. Heller went cold. That's impossible. Yeah, Ortega said. But it's there. He hung up, staring at the recorder on the table. For a long time he didn't move. Then he took the journal and the rosary, placed both in a plastic evidence bag, and drove toward the river one last time. The field was empty when he arrived. The parish ruins glistened with fresh mud. Concrete had been poured over the shaft where the tunnel once gaped open, but the river still murmured nearby, restless, alive. He sat on the embankment, opened the journal again, and read the final lines aloud, his voice rough. I will give it silence, or it will take sound from the world. The words carried into the water, scattering like birds. For a moment, nothing. Then a single ripple moved against the current, climbing toward his boots. He whispered, You're still here, aren't you? The ripple stopped. The air thickened. He turned on his recorder. Field note, day 9. Recovered Father Brennan's journal. Entries confirm auditory ritual tied to children's choir. Indicates intentional act. A low hum cut through his words. The river had begun to sing. Not loudly, soft, almost tender, as though dozens of voices hummed from beneath the surface. The melody was the same hymn Ruth Callahan had remembered. Heller rose slowly. Field note, river resonance anomaly continuing. Source undetermined. The hum grew stronger, the tone rising until it matched the pitch of the old church bell. He took a step back. The mud shifted underfoot. Something gleamed between the reeds. Metal. He crouched and pulled it free. A brass crucifix, its surface worn smooth on the back, was an inscription. For Jacob. Light through the water. His vision blurred. He wiped the crucifix clean and saw something new carved beneath the rust. His own initials. He stumbled back, the world tilting. No, he whispered. No, that's not. The water's surface broke. Bubbles rose. Then a hand, small, pale, reached upward through the current and fell away again. Heller's knees gave out. The recorder slipped from his grasp, splashing into the shallows. Its red light blinked once, then steadied. Detective Heller. His own voice whispered from it. Confess. He grabbed the device, shaking. I have nothing to confess. Confess. He threw the recorder into the river. It vanished beneath the ripples. The hum cutting off silence crashed in, so complete it rang in his ears. When he looked down again, the crucifix was gone. Only the wet imprint of its shape remained in his palm. He sat on the bank until dusk, unable to move, the journal open beside him. The last page glowed faintly in the fading light. Ink shimmering like water, he could have sworn new words had appeared beneath the old ones. Every listener becomes the next bell. That night, back in the motel, he tried to sleep, but the silence was worse than the sound. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt the rhythm of the water sinking with his pulse. When he finally drifted off, he dreamed of 6 children standing on the riverbank, hands clasped, faces serene. Behind them stood a man in priest's robes, faceless, holding a seventh bell. He rang it once. The sound didn't wake him. It stopped his breathing for a full 10 seconds. The motel phone began ringing before sunrise. Heller woke in a half-dream, heart pounding, the echo of the bell still in his ears. He let it ring twice before answering. Detective Heller. "Sir, it's Ortega." The tech's voice cracked through static. "You need to see this in person. The waveforms from that last tape, something changed. I told you to stop analyzing them." "I didn't. The computer did." Ortega hesitated. "It pulled a new file out of the static, a pattern like speech. And it says your name." Heller pinched the bridge of his nose. "Send it to my email." "No, you don't want that thing in your system." The line went dead. He stared at the receiver for a long time before hanging up. Outside, the morning was mist-thick, the river a long white scar in the distance. He showered, dressed, and left without breakfast. By the time he reached the station, Ortega was waiting at his desk, laptop open, eyes ringed with sleeplessness. "I isolated the pattern," Ortega said. "It's not background noise, it's human." He pressed play. The speakers hissed. Then a low male voice murmured, warped by age and water. "He listens for them still. He holds the silence like a prayer." Heller stiffened. "Who's speaking?" Ortega swallowed. "I think it's Father Brennan, but the timestamps put it at 3 days ago." "That's impossible. Tell that to the waveform." He leaned over the monitor. The spectrogram pulsed gently, as if alive. "When the 7th bell answers," the voice continued, "the listener must take his place." The recording ended in a sound like rushing water. Heller stepped back. "Shut it off." Ortega obeyed, hands trembling. "Sir, whatever's on those tapes, it's learning. Every file gets clearer, like it's using the noise to rebuild." "Rebuild what?" Ortega met his gaze. "The choir." By afternoon, the town was soaked in another storm. The river swelled, swallowing the road to the parish ruins. Local crews had started clearing debris for a memorial garden, as if burying the story again could undo it. Heller parked at the perimeter and walked the muddy path down to the water. The concrete slab that sealed the tunnel gleamed with rain. On it, someone had scrawled 3 words in chalk. "The 7th listens." The handwriting looked familiar, too neat, too careful. His own. He knelt, fingertips brushing the wet chalk. A trick of the rain, he told himself. Memory filling in the gaps. Still, he whispered, "If you want a listener, I'm here." A wind rose from the river, sharp and cold. Somewhere beneath the surface, something shifted, a deep vibration, like stone moving against stone. He heard a faint sound behind him. A single chime. The slab cracked. Hairline fractures spidered across the concrete, rainwater seeping through. The sound came again, not from the river but inside his head, a harmonic resonance that made his teeth ache. Then silence. He stumbled back, mud slick underfoot, eyes fixed on the widening fissure. Beneath it, faint glimmers of metal, bells, half-buried, rusted, yet vibrating gently. He pressed record on his handheld mic. Field note, unknown seismic movement at site. Possible subsurface structure responding to audio frequencies. But what frequency? The hum from the tapes. The hymn the children sang. He began to whistle the melody softly, barely audible. The fissures widened. Rain hissed. The slab collapsed inward. A hole gaped open, exhaling a breath of air that smelled of earth and incense. Below lay a staircase spiraling into darkness. He turned off the recorder and started down. The tunnel was colder than before, the walls slick and breathing. Each step echoed like a heartbeat. At the bottom, a door stood open, a door he hadn't seen on his first descent. Its hinges gleamed, newly oiled. On the threshold lay a small object, his lost recorder. He picked it up. The red light blinked once, then steadied. "Field note," his voice whispered from it, entering the silence. The recording ended. He pocketed the device and crossed into the chamber. It was larger than he remembered. The old altar still stood at its center, but the icons on the wall had changed. The children's faces, drawn in soot and water, stared back at him, eyes open, mouths parted in song. He turned slowly. Behind him, the door closed on its own. "Father Brennan," he called, his voice trembling. "If this is confession, I'm ready." The air thickened. A shape began to form near the altar, a figure in drenched vestments, face obscured by dripping cloth. The voice that answered was gentle, almost kind. "Then confess, Daniel. How do you know my name?" "Because you gave it to me. You listened." Heller stepped closer. The figure raised a hand. In its palm lay the brass crucifix he'd lost to the river. "You opened the silence," the figure said. "Now it must speak through you." The chamber pulsed with sound, low, rising, harmonic. His body vibrated with it, every bone a tuning fork. "Stop!" he gasped. "Please!" "There is no stopping, only listening." The air ignited with light. He saw faces in it, the missing children, the nuns, the priest, all singing in perfect unity. Their mouths moved without breath, yet the sound filled every corner of the world. He dropped to his knees, hands clamped over his ears, but the song was inside him now, under his skin. When the seventh bell answers, the listener must take his place. He understood then. Father Brennan hadn't vanished. He had become part of the silence. The ritual demanded a sexur. The voices reached a crescendo, then stopped. Heller opened his eyes. He was alone. The altar was bare, the walls clean. The rivers whispered distant above. On the floor before him lay the recorder, its screen flashing a single word: "Listen." He smashed it against the stone until it shattered, pieces scattering like teeth. The sound echoed unnaturally long, as if the chamber didn't want to let go. When he emerged hours later, dawn was breaking again. The storm had passed. The river ran calm. He walked until he reached the road, mud caked to his boots, water dripping from his coat. A maintenance crew was setting up barriers around the collapse site. One worker nodded politely. "You from the county?" "Something like that," Heller said. He looked back once. Mist coiled over the hole where the stairway had been. No hum, no bells, but when he exhaled, the mist pulsed to the rhythm of his breath. He realized the silence he carried wasn't absence. It was waiting. For the first time in weeks, the sky above Austin was clear. The river gleamed silver under the early light, quiet, deceptively harmless. Detective Daniel Heller sat in his car overlooking the water, the engine off, the world holding its breath. He hadn't filed a report, hadn't spoken to Ortega or the department since the night in the tunnel. His badge lay on the passenger seat beside the broken recorder. He'd meant to turn both in. He couldn't. Something pulsed faintly in his chest, a rhythm that wasn't quite his heartbeat. It had begun the morning after the silence ritual, a soundless echo he felt rather than heard the seventh bell, still ringing somewhere behind his ribs. He started the car and drove toward the parish site one last time. The cleanup crews were gone, the equipment hauled away. The ruin stood empty, cordoned off by a half-hearted strip of police tape that fluttered uselessly in the breeze. He stepped over it and crossed the field. His shoes sank into damp soil where the tunnel had been sealed. The concrete patch shimmered slightly, as if thin frost coated it despite the warmth of the day. He knelt, pressed his palm to it. The pulse in his chest matched the faint vibration under his hand. "Field note," he whispered out of habit. Though the recorder was dead, residual resonance persists. Possibly natural echo. Possibly. He trailed off. The faintest sound reached him, a child humming. He stood, scanning the trees. Nothing. But the melody continued, weaving through the branches. The same tune the children had sung in the tapes. He followed it down to the riverbank. The water moved sluggishly, brown with silt. Near the bend where the old ferry dock had been, he saw something bobbing. Small, round, metallic, bell. He waded in, boots filling with mud, water rising past his knees. He caught the object and lifted it free. The bell was old, its clapper missing, engraved with the same Latin phrase, aqua est lumen. He turned it over. Inside, a single bead rattled, smooth and white. The missing rosary bead. He felt warmth bloom in his palm, gentle at first, then spreading through his arm. His pulse synchronized with the vibration in the metal. "Father Brennan," he murmured, "is this what you wanted?" The river answered. A surge of light flashed beneath the surface, brief but blinding, like the sun caught in water. The current turned, spinning around him in slow circles. Then he saw them, faint figures under the ripples, 6 small shapes standing upright, faces tilted toward him. The children. One by one, they lifted their hands, palms open. He staggered back, but the current held him in place. The light thickened, gold and blue, swirling upward until the air hummed. A voice spoke within it, not heard but felt, deep as the riverbed. Every listener becomes the next bell. He shook his head. "No, I'm not." "You are. You opened the silence. You carried it. Then take it back. It doesn't return. It moves." The light flared. The hum rose into a chord that seemed to pierce the sky. Pain split through his skull. He fell to his knees, water up to his chest. The bell still clenched in his hand. Images flooded his mind. The night of the storm, Sister Margaret holding a lantern, the children's voices weaving around the priest's chant, the moment the river swallowed them all, and then his own reflection among them. He screamed, but the sound made no noise. Only the water rippled. When the light dimmed, he was alone again. Standing in knee-deep water, the bell gone from his hand. He looked down. Around his wrist hung the rosary, whole again, every bead intact. He turned toward the bank. Ortega stood there, soaked, breathless, eyes wide. "Jesus, Heller, what the hell are you doing? How did you find me?" "Your voicemail," Ortega said. "You said you were finishing it. I didn't call anyone." "Yes, you did. Said you needed a witness." Heller stared at him, uncomprehending. "Witness to what?" Ortega hesitated, then lifted a small recording device. "It's still running. You called and said, 'It's about to ring.'" He pressed play. Heller's own voice came through the speaker, calm, steady, almost serene. "The 7th bell rings when the silence finds another mouth." Then a clear, perfect toll of metal. Ortega dropped the recorder as if burned. "What the hell is that?" Heller looked toward the river. The surface was flat, peaceful. The wind had died. "I think," he said softly, "it's the end of the song." He took a slow step toward the water. "Heller, don't." But he didn't stop. The current met him halfway, gentle, warm. "It's not drowning," he said over his shoulder. "It's listening." The light beneath the water flared once more, engulfing him. For a heartbeat, Ortega saw his friend's silhouette suspended there, arms outstretched like a conductor calling the final note. Then the glow vanished, the river smoothing itself as if nothing had happened. Silence. Only the faintest vibration lingered in the air, deep enough to feel in bone, but not in ear. Hours later, Ortega sat on the riverbank, soaked and shaking. The recorder he'd dropped still blinked red. He picked it up and replayed the final seconds. It's not drowning. It's listening. Then, faintly, almost tenderly, a 7th toll. He looked out across the water. For a moment, He thought he saw 6 small figures standing in the shallows, holding hands. Then they faded into mist. He exhaled, long and shuddering. God help you, Danny. He stood and turned to leave. But as he walked, the rosary Heller had worn lay tangled around his boot. He picked it up. Every bead was whole, gleaming faintly. When he slipped it into his pocket, he swore he heard a single chime, soft, patient, as if something in the river had found a new listener. The video opens the way the first one did, grainy black and white footage of the river, framed by cattails whispering in wind. A woman's voice speaks over the static. This is the story of Detective Daniel Heller, the man who listened too long. The channel watermark glows faintly in the corner. Lumen Files, unsolved and unforgiven. The narrator continues. The official record says Heller vanished in the spring of 1998 while investigating the St. Matthew's disappearance. His body was never recovered. The river, they said, rose too fast to allow a search. The image cuts to photos. Black and white stills of the chapel ruins, the cracked bell, the children's faces, the kind of montage that plays before the algorithm auto-loads an ad. But what if I told you there were new sounds on the recovered tapes, recordings no one can explain? A soft chime sounds, 7 notes, each perfectly spaced. The video fades to the host's face. A young woman in her late 20s, dark hair pulled back, microphone glinting beside her. Her studio lights are warm, homey, yet there's tension in her smile. My name is Eliza Doyle. My grandmother once worked for the county archives. She used to tell me stories about the nuns and the priest who disappeared. She also told me to stay away from the river. She holds up a cassette labeled in shaky handwriting. The 7th Bell. This is the copy Detective Heller made before he vanished. It turned up in the evidence backlog 2 months ago. Tonight, we'll play it for the first time in 25 years. The chat on the live stream races. Play it. Fake. Let's go. Eliza exhales. Headphones recommended. She presses play. Static, low and steady. Then a man's voice, Heller's, whispering through water. The door beneath the river opens only for those who've listened. Eliza closes her eyes, listening. That's him, she says softly. You can hear the echo, like another voice behind his. In the background, the chat slows. The viewers start typing timestamps, noting whispers between the words. At 3:17, they're singing Listen Again. Kids. Eliza leans toward the mic. There's something underneath it. The audio spikes. A low hum fills the room, resonant enough to shake the camera. The lights flicker once, twice, then hold steady. The 7th bell rings when the silence finds another mouth. She freezes. That line wasn't on the transcript, she says, voice thin. That wasn't there before. Her headphones vibrate. The hum grows louder, pressing against the walls. Behind her, on the studio shelf, a small brass bell begins to tremble. Eliza reaches out and mutes the audio. The hum cuts off instantly. She sits back, breathing hard. Okay, that, wasn't in post. That was live. My waveform's still clean. She forces a smile for the camera. Guess the story still wants to be heard. The chat explodes again. What if it's real play? It again, 7 bells, 7 souls. Eliza shakes her head. I'll upload the cleaned version later. For now, maybe we call that a night. She leans forward and lowers her voice, speaking past the audience. If Detective Heller is still out there, wherever there is, thank you for listening. She ends the stream. The screen fades to the channel's closing graphic. Subscribe for more forgotten stories. But the recording doesn't end. After a few seconds, the camera light flickers back on. The studio is empty. The bell on the shelf sways gently, though no air moves. Off-screen, a man's voice, older, tired, speaks faintly, field note, day 100, new listener found. Then silence. Morning. The river again, sunlight glinting across the surface. A fisherman drags his net toward shore, muttering about lost lures. When he hauls it up, something metallic glints among the reeds. A small cassette tape, rusted, label faded. He turns it over in his hand. Only one word remains legible. Listen. He pockets it, shrugs, and walks back toward his truck. As he drives off, the camera lingers on the river. The sound returns, soft, deep, harmonic. Not music, not thunder. Something between. Bells. 7, perfectly spaced, fading into the current. The final image holds on the water until its only reflection, sky trembling on the surface. Then black. Text appears. The St. Matthew's investigation remains unsolved. All archival recordings are sealed by order of the diocese. If you have information about the case, contact. The words glitch for one frame, barely visible. A single line replaces them. Every listener becomes the next bell.